So there's this quote that really caught my eye. Canada and Mexico will need each other more than we ever have.
Hmm.
That was Canada's ambassador to Mexico, Cameron McKay, just this past December. And it's not just a nice diplomatic line, is it? It feels like the whole story right there.
It really is. It sets the stage perfectly. For this deep dive, we're looking at what is genuinely a new comprehensive strategic alliance forming between the U.S.'s two neighbors.
Right.
And we've pulled sources that show how years of, let's say, economic pressure from Washington,
Mm.
specifically the current administration's trade policies, have kind of inadvertently forced this to happen.
So our mission today is to unpack that. How did we get here? How did American unreliability become the main catalyst for this unified Canada-Mexico front?
And if you really want to grasp how serious this is, you just have to look at one thing, the headline event.
The trade mission.
The single largest trade mission Canada has ever sent to any country. Ever. And it's happening in February 2026. This isn't just a delegation. It's a full-on economic push to embed Canadian business deep inside Mexico.
Okay, so let's unpack that, because this isn't some routine handshake. This is a deliberate, really calculated move. It feels like it's fundamentally reshaping how North American trade even works.
It is.
Instead of just, taking the terms that are given, they're building this new independent access. And in doing so, they're costing the U.S. decades of leverage built up through NAFTA and CUSMA.
And you have to look at the timing to get the politics of it. The partnership officially launched in September 2025.
Which was about 8 months into the administration's second term.
Exactly, but it was years in the making. They weren't just, sitting around hoping for stability. They were actively building an economy around the certainty of instability.
And instability is the perfect word. Let's just quickly recap the pressure points that really broke the trust. It started back in November 2024, right? With the threats of a 25% tariff on everything.
And those weren't just threats. By February 2025, they were imposed. And the way they did it was deeply provocative. They used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEEP Act.
Which is for sanctioning rogue states or terrorists.
Right. So suddenly, imports from Canada and Mexico were an extraordinary threat to national security because of illegal aliens and drugs.
Oh.
It basically treated your closest allies as enemies.
And that just created immediate chaos in the supply chains.
Total chaos. Even with a slight break for Canadian energy, which got a 10% rate, most other goods got hit with the full 25%.
And then it got even more complicated, didn't it, with the exemption?
Oh, this is where the administrative nightmare really begins.
Yeah.
A few days later, they offered temporary exemptions, but only for goods that could prove they were fully compliant with CSMA.
Wait, hold on. So the same administration threatening to tear up CSMA is now forcing everyone to do a mountain of paperwork just to prove they're following CUSMA rules to avoid the tariffs.
That is the absurdity of it, yes. If you're a CEO of an auto parts company, you suddenly have to recertify every single component, every input, just to get a temporary pass.
Wow.
Our sources show that by August of 2025, 86% of Canadian imports and 87% of Mexican imports had been restructured just to meet those rules.
That's an incredible amount of wasted capital just dealing with political risk, and the pressure just kept mounting.
It escalated. In July 2025, they announced plans for even higher tariffs, 35% on Canada, 30% on Mexico. And then, the final straw in October.
The ad.
The administration broke off all trade talks with Canada, all of them, over an Ontario government ad that featured Ronald Reagan speaking out against tariffs.
It's unbelievable. It stops being about trade policy and starts to feel more like just political bullying.
Which brings up the big question.
Yeah.
What was the core strategic mistake here? The U.S. strategy was obvious, right? Divide and conquer.
Force them into separate bilateral deals where the U.S. has all the power?
Exactly. The fatal flaw was assuming that Canada and Mexico had no other choice, that they would just have to accept it. And that assumption, well, it turned out to be spectacularly wrong.
And that's the vacuum this new alliance was built to fill. So fast forward to September 18th, 2025. Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Claudia Sheinbaum are in Mexico City, and they announced this new comprehensive strategic partnership.
Right. And on the surface, it's all diplomatic language. 4 pillars. prosperity, security, inclusion, sustainability.
But the real message, the unspoken one, was pretty clear.
Crystal clear. They were positioning themselves as the strategic alternative to relying on the U.S. They talked about making North America competitive, dynamic, and resilient.
And I think that word resilient, that's the key. When they say that, they mean building something that works even when your biggest partner, the U.S., is actively trying to break the whole system.
Exactly. They're shock-proofing their relationship. And look, they're not starting from zero. There's a really strong foundation here.
The numbers are pretty dramatic if you look back. Under NAFTA in '94, trade between Canada and Mexico was what, under 5 billion Canadian dollars?
Right.
By 2024, it was $56 billion. That's a 12-fold increase. Mexico is already Canada's third biggest trading partner.
But what's really fascinating is the quality of that trade. It's not just commodities anymore. Canadian direct investment in Mexico is over $46 billion. Canada is the biggest foreign investor in Mexico's mining sector.
So this is about deep integration, advanced manufacturing, clean tech, ICT, agriculture. These aren't short-term deals.
No, these are long-term cross-border commitments. And that's the point. It's not just about trading more stuff. It's about strategically decoupling from American economic coercion.
Building what you call redundant supply chains.
That's exactly the goal. Building chains that deliberately bypass the United States. They're even looking at joint production facilities to target markets in Asia and Latin America, creating pathways that don't even touch the U.S.
But how do you do that physically? I mean, the U.S. is literally in the middle. If you're shipping from Mexico to Asia, you almost have to use U.S. ports or rail.
And this is where the logistics get revolutionary. The sources we have point to a crucial detail: creating direct access to each other's ports.
Ah.
So now, Mexican goods can get to Asian markets using Canadian Pacific rail lines, and then, and this is key, Canada's access to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP.
Right, the TPP. So for listeners who might not follow trade deals closely, that gives Mexico access to what?
It gives them preferential access to 11 Pacific Rim countries. We're talking Japan, Australia, Vietnam, major economies. By using Canadian ports, Mexican goods can get to all of those markets without ever crossing into U.S. territory. No U.S. tariffs, no U.S. customs, no U.S. politics.
That is a brilliant strategic move. It essentially turns the U.S. landmass into a giant toll booth that they are now building a highway around.
A very expensive toll booth, yes. And the manufacturing strategy just makes it even deeper. Canadian companies make the high-value parts, ship them to Mexico for assembly where labor is cheaper.
And then Mexico uses its own free trade agreements to sell the finished product all over Latin America.
Exactly. They're playing to their complementary strengths to deliberately get around the U.S. consumer market.
And I'm guessing the auto sector is the clearest example of this.
It's the perfect illustration. Cars assembled in Mexico with Canadian parts already meet the 75% North American content rule to get into the U.S. duty-free.
Right.
But here's the kicker. Those same cars now have a backdoor into Latin America through Mexico's deals and a backdoor into Asia through Canada's ports. They've built a model that works whether the U.S. is a reliable partner or not.
Which brings us back to that February 2026 mission. This is the ultimate power play, creating facts on the ground. And the scale of it is it's huge.
It's astronomical. Hundreds of Canadian businesses applied. The demand is so high that the organizers are actually worried about logistics, about having room for everyone.
And that tells you everything, doesn't it? It shows a real desperation from businesses to find an escape from the uncertainty of the U.S. market.
For sure. And it's not a free-for-all. It's highly targeted. 6 key sectors: advanced manufacturing, clean tech, ICT, agri-food, ag tech, and creative industries.
And these aren't just mixers. They're setting up prearranged business-to-business meetings, right, for small and medium companies to actually sign deals.
To forge immediate contractual relationships. And this is where the timing becomes just brilliant political chess.
The mission wraps up just a few months before
the mandatory review of the CUSMA agreement starts in July 2026.
So that's the whole point. By the time they get to the negotiating table, there will be hundreds of new binding commercial contracts already in place. Real economic facts on the ground.
That's the leverage. Ambassador Kay even said Canadian businesses are desperate for this. It's proof that the U.S. pressure isn't forcing submission. It's forcing them away. When they show up in July, they're not coming as 2 separate countries. They're coming as bonded partners with credible alternatives already running.
If you think about the old NAFTA model, it was always a hub-and-spoke system with the U.S. at the center.
Always. Trade between Canada and Mexico was almost an afterthought compared to each of their relationships with Washington.
But this changes the whole architecture.
Yeah.
For the first time, they're building these direct bilateral things, like the Canada-Mexico Action Plan, that operate completely independently of the U.S.
They're not asking for permission anymore.
So what does that mean for the map of North America? It sounds less like a hub and spoke and more like a triangle.
It is exactly a triangle. Instead of one indispensable center, you now have three powerful economic hubs. Canada and Mexico can trade, build, and ship to each other with zero American involvement needed. That geometric shift just craters U.S. leverage.
And it goes beyond just trade. They're also cooperating on security.
Absolutely. The bilateral security work is huge. They're coordinating on fentanyl interdiction, migrant integration, border security, because they see them as shared problems they need to solve themselves, regardless of what Washington wants.
So you put it all together. By July 2026, the U.S. administration, which wanted divided supplicants, is instead facing a united front.
A united front with a backup plan already in motion. Sure, ending CUSMA would be painful. It would slap tariffs on over 84% of their trade with the U.S., but they're actively building the shock absorbers to survive it.
And the reverse isn't true, is it? The U.S. can't just easily survive that.
Not at all. U.S. supply chains, especially in autos and tech, are so deeply woven with Canadian and Mexican parts. You can't replace that overnight. The strategy to maximize U.S. leverage has, ironically, created a self-reliant alliance ready to push back.
So that's the narrative. The U.S. threatened and tried to divide, and Canada and Mexico responded not by yelling back, but by quietly building something stronger together, insulating themselves from the instability.
And we have to be clear, the things they're building now, the port access, the integrated factories, the security cooperation, this isn't some temporary political statement. These are huge long-term investments. They won't just disappear when an administration changes. This is defining continental trade for the next generation.
For decades, U.S. policy was designed to prevent a deep Canada-Mexico alliance because it was seen as a threat to American control. Now that American policy itself has forced that alliance to accelerate, what are the long-term costs for the U.S. economy of being strategically walled off from the most integrated supply chain being built right on its own borders? That has to be the question keeping people up at night in Washington.